Today, we're tackling a period in American history with a name that is, let's be honest, famously misleading: the era of good feelings. Now just look at that question mark. It's there for a reason, because the name hides a much darker, much more divided reality. So what's the real story here? Let's dig in.
Like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I mean, these are not the words you'd expect to hear about an era of good feelings, right? But that was former President Thomas Jefferson in 1820. He was reacting to a political crisis that he believed was the knell of the Union, basically a death bell for the United States. That terror he felt, that's our first big clue that something is way off with the official story.
And yeah, that brings us to the central puzzle of this whole thing. If a founding father like Jefferson was terrified for the future of the country, how on earth did this period get such a famously cheerful name? To figure that out, we have to peel back the layers of a story that is way more complicated than it sounds.
Okay, so to solve this puzzle, we've got to start at the beginning. Where did this incredibly optimistic name even come from in the first place?
Well, the term was actually coined by a Boston newspaper right after James Monroe was elected president in 1816. You have to remember, the War of 1812 was finally over, and there was this genuine wave of American nationalism and optimism sweeping the country. It really felt like a fresh start. And a huge part of this vibe came down to the political scene. The Federalist Party, which had pretty much opposed the War of 1812, had just collapsed. It basically disappeared. This left Monroe's Democratic Republicans as the only major political party left standing. So on the surface, it looked like total political harmony. And get this. This slide just drives the point home. In 1820, Monroe was re-elected with every single electoral vote except for one. Just think about that for a second. A level of unity that is almost unimaginable today. It was the perfect picture of a nation in total agreement. But that's all it was, a picture, and a very misleading one at that.
As historians will tell you, this whole idea of harmony is, to put it simply, misleading and oversimplified. The truth is, the good feelings, if they ever really existed, were incredibly fragile and didn't last long. That one-party system was really just hiding some deep, bitter divisions simmering right under the surface.
So here's the thing. Even though everyone was technically in the same political party, they were fighting like crazy over some really fundamental issues. There were heated debates over economic policy, like tariffs and the national bank, over how to pay for roads and canals, land policy, you name it. But lurking behind all of it was the most dangerous and explosive issue of all: slavery.
Now, to really understand these fights, we need to look at the ambitious economic plan that was at the center of it all. A plan that was supposed to unite the country, but in many ways ended up highlighting the divisions even more.
The big idea floating around after the war was this concept called economic nationalism. The goal was simple: use the power of the federal government to build a strong, self-sufficient American economy. This was a really major shift toward the federal government playing a much more active role in American life.
And the master plan for all of this was championed by a congressman named Henry Clay. He called it his American System, and it had three main parts. First, protective tariffs to help new American factories compete against cheaper British goods. Second, a new national bank to create a single stable currency. And third, federally funded infrastructure, we're talking roads and canals, to physically tie the whole massive country together.
But one of the key pillars of that plan hit a huge roadblock. Both President Madison and his successor, President Monroe, believed the Constitution did not give the federal government the power to spend money on these internal improvements, so they vetoed the funding again and again, leaving states to figure out how to build roads and canals on their own. This was a really early sign of a deep disagreement over just how powerful the federal government should be.
So you've already got these political disagreements creating some serious cracks in the foundation. But those cracks were about to be supercharged by an economic crisis that would shatter any illusion of good feelings that was left.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective. Monroe gets elected in 1816, and there's all this optimism. Then, just 3 years later, bam, in 1819, the nation is plunged into its first major financial depression, the Panic of 1819.
And the panic was a total disaster. The Second Bank of the United States, a key part of that American system, tried to slow down runaway inflation by tightening credit. Well, that set off a devastating chain reaction. State banks failed, businesses went bankrupt, and unemployment shot through the roof. The crisis was especially brutal out west, where tons of farmers who had borrowed money to buy land now faced foreclosure, often from the very national bank they were told was there to help them. This created some serious resentment and just poured fuel on the fire of regional tension. And right as the nation was reeling from this economic crisis, that political fire bell in the night that so terrified Thomas Jefferson started to ring loud and clear. The issue? Missouri wanted to join the Union as a new state.
To get why this was such a massive crisis, you have to understand the delicate, razor-thin balance of power we see here. In 1819, the nation was perfectly divided, 11 free states and 11 slave states. This meant they had equal power in the Senate, which was crucial because the South could use that power to block any federal law that threatened the institution of slavery.
And this slide shows you exactly why that Senate balance was a non-negotiable for the South. See, in the House, representation is based on population, and the more populous North already had a clear majority there, 105 seats to 81. So the Senate was the South's only real firewall.
So, when Missouri applied for statehood as a slave state, it threatened to completely shatter that balance and give the slave-holding states a permanent upper hand in the Senate. For the North, this was totally unacceptable. For the South, any attempt to stop Missouri was seen as a direct attack on their entire way of life. The debate absolutely exploded, and for the first time, the Union itself was at real risk of breaking apart.
And who steps in to try and fix it? Henry Clay, again. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was this masterful, if temporary, solution. Here's how it worked. First, Missouri gets to come in as a slave state. But second, to keep the balance, Maine would enter as a free state. And third, they drew a line across the rest of the Louisiana Territory. From that point on, slavery would be prohibited in all future territories north of that 36-degree 30-minute parallel line.
And the compromise worked. It stopped a civil war. For a little while. But the crisis itself revealed the true, fractured state of the Union.
The Missouri Compromise managed to hold the nation together for another 30 years or so, but the fight over it had been so bitter, so ugly, that it just completely destroyed any good feelings that might have been left. The fundamental conflict over slavery was now out in the open for everyone to see, and it was not going away.
And this slide really nails the two competing forces that would define America for the next 40 years. On one side, you have nationalism, a loyalty to the Union, to the nation as a whole. And on the other, you have sectionalism, this fierce loyalty to your own region, the North, the South, or the West. The era of good feelings was really just a brief, fragile moment when it seemed like nationalism might win. The Missouri crisis proved that sectionalism was the deeper, more powerful, and ultimately the more dangerous force.
So we're left with this huge question. Henry Clay's compromise was a brilliant political move that bought the nation some precious time. But was it a real solution? Or was it just a band-aid on a fatal wound, just delaying an inevitable, catastrophic conflict over the future of the country? It's a question that history, tragically, would eventually answer.